X-Men 97 comes out in a few days, and I am so excited. So we're explaining the character of Bishop, who I think is one of the coolest X-Men to ever exist in the history of Marvel Comics. So Bishop's entire history is inexorably tied to House of M and a girl named Hope Summers. And the way this played out, as most of you guys know from the House of M, that was the story where the Scarlet Witch took away 98% of the mutant population's powers. Full stop, right? No more mutants. Dunzo. And so what you got in a follow-up story to that was a story called Messiah Complex. That introduced Hope Summers as the first mutant born after the events of House of M. And she basically represented the return of mutants to Marvel Comics. Now, unlike the main Marvel universe, where Hope Summers would go on to become a superhero, in Bishop's reality, she goes on to initiate something called the 6-Minute War. And in that conflict, she eradicates 1 million humans in 6 minutes. And that's where this sort of dark and dystopian future begins to kick in. Now, the big differences between Days of Future Past and Bishop's timeline is that unlike Days of Future Past, where the Sentinels conquered the entirety of North America and enslaved both humans and mutants, eradicating huge groups of both, in Bishop's timeline, the Sentinels were used as a tool by humanity, that instead of just imprisoning every single mutant they could find, initially humanity started passing laws that restricted what mutants couldn't do, right? The Mutant Registration Act. After that, they started rounding them up and putting them in internment camps. Bishop was born in one of these camps, and that's why he has the M on his face. It's quite literally a brand for mutant. Now, following that, you ended up having humanity initiating these kind of like genetic testing protocols. Now, this all went on for decades and decades and decades. And after a while, humanity got tired of it. One part because humanity was experiencing oppression just like the mutants were, just not nearly as badly. The other reason is because humanity started to sympathize with the mutant population. And so by this point in time, Cyclops, who was one of the very few mutants that was able to operate underground, free from being thrown in an internment camp, albeit just brutal and old and very, very cynical, he, alongside his daughter Ruby, initiated the Summers Rebellion. Now, Bishop was not a part of the rebellion. He was too young. At this point, he was like 5 or 6 years old when the Summers Rebellion happened. But that rebellion was a coming together of humanity and the mutant population to cast off the existing totalitarian government and to destroy the Sentinel program. And they were successful in doing it. But following that, what you ended up getting was a very tenuous alliance between humans and mutants, because that baseline fear of mutants representing the extinction of humanity, right, the next stage of human evolution, that was still there. But in order to avoid a kind of tyrannical government, just like before, what you ended up getting as a kind of police force for the mutant population was something called the Xavier Security Enforcers, also known as the XSE. This group is what Bishop and his sister Shard eventually became a part of. Now, over the course of his time as part of the XSE, he ended up coming across Trevor Fitzroy, who was basically a kind of time terrorist, if you want to call him that, but they were kind of playing a cat and mouse game, and eventually their fight ends up leading Bishop to traveling back to the present day, and then he ultimately joins the X-Men, and he had been there for quite some time. But when Hope Summers is born during Messiah Complex, Bishop puts 2 and 2 together, because when he was a little kid, before the Summers Rebellion happened, when he was raised by his grandma, he was routinely taught Hope Summers is the reason why all this happened in the first place. So her name was drilled into his head. As soon as she was born, he went on the hunt. Now, during Messiah Complex, you ended up finding out that no one could find Hope because she'd been rescued by the superhero Cable, and Cable took her into the future. Bishop ends up following them. So what you get over the course of the Messiah Complex story is Cable with baby Hope Summers jumping through the time stream, trying to avoid Bishop and anybody else that can find them, and Bishop chasing after Cable, trying to kill them both. Now, ultimately, the entirety of Messiah Complex ends, and Hope survives, and then Cable survives, and they all go into Messiah War. But the bigger point that I'm making here is that Bishop does not come from Days of Future Past. It's just a giant misnomer. But the nature of Bishop's powers, and this is one of the coolest things to know about his character, Bishop has the ability to absorb any kind of energy that exists out there. It doesn't matter what energy it is. He can absorb energy from the sun, he can absorb magic, he can absorb sound, x-rays, the whole 9 yards. It's virtually impossible to destroy Bishop with any kind of energy. So if Cyclops blasts Bishop with his optic beams, or Gambit throws his deck of cards at him, or Doctor Strange fires a spell at him, Bishop can absorb it all. There is a caveat to this, right? Bishop is like a glass of water, where if you pour water into a glass, it'll eventually overflow. The equivalent of that overflowing for Bishop is that he explodes. So he has to let that energy off at some point in time. But the way in which he does that is as varying as the kind of energy he can absorb. He could be shot with Cyclops' optic blast and then shoot him with fire, right? He could shoot energy beams out of his eyes. He can hold that energy in himself and turn it into like super strength and give himself a healing factor. It's cool with all the kinds of things that he can do. You don't really have anybody in Marvel outside of Sebastian Shaw who can absorb energy and just turn it into strength. Very few people have that kind of power, but it makes him one of the most capable and useful members of the X-Men, especially if you're talking about members out there that have energy. So say, for example, that you have like some super powerful Sentinel like Nimrod that like Gambit can throw his explosive cards on Bishop and Cyclops can shoot him with his energy blasts, and any number of other X-Men that have energy-based powers can just start firing them at Gambit, and he can serve as a conduit, right? He can just start letting off more and more energy and hopefully defeat Nimrod, because Sentinels like Nimrod are nigh indestructible. We can make a video explaining Sentinels if you guys are interested, because the ones from X-Men the Animated Series and the ones you'll see in X-Men 97, those are Stephen Lang's Sentinels, and I'm really wondering if we're going to get to see Nimrod again, because that guy is a hoss. And if we get to see Nimrod in Master Mold, that means we get to see Bastion. And if we get to see Bastion, that guy will single-handedly just crush the X-Men with the greatest of ease. He almost did it in Messiah War. But with that being said, guys, let me know what you think down in the comments section, and let me know if you want to see videos like this, just quick and dirty explanations of characters. And I will catch you all later. Peace.